Dr. Dan Hill, welcome back to the podcast.
Absolutely. How's the other Dan doing?
The other Dan's doing well, sir. Thank you so much for asking. Good to see you, my friend.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
So, since your last appearance, you have published a new book with Howard Moskowitz, and it is called Blah, 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 a snarky guide to office lingo. Tell me, Dan, how would you describe the book and what was the aha moment that set the wheels in motion to get it compiled and published?
Sure. I have a podcast on which two guests in a row, unsolicited, happen to mention that about 25% of office managers in corporate America are believed to be bullies. And it just stunned me. We talk so much about corporate culture and how it's important to recruit talent nowadays, especially when people are fleeing the corporate ranks, the Great Resignation, as it's being called. And that you would allow this cancer basically in the midst of trying to create a robust, vibrant, inviting corporate culture. Just, it overwhelmed me. And I woke up one morning and I thought of a book I've always loved, which is The Devil's Dictionary by Ambrose Bierce, which has entries like dentist, someone who puts metal in your mouth while taking gold from your pocket.
Oh,
And Yankee, no such thing. See, damn Yankee. And so on and so forth. And I've always loved the book and it's considered one of the 100 greatest works of American literature. And I said, well, I think I'm going to tackle this topic and others in the workplace, but I'm going to do it using humor because sometimes humor creates a little less resistance and a little in the joyous moment of enjoying the humor. Maybe you're a little more expansive emotionally and you can make progress. So I decided to go a different route to the same end that I've always been after, which is surely can't we do things better in business, whatever the purview, whatever the application.
well, you gathered a lot of examples and you crowdsourced them from your friends and colleagues in business. What are some of your favorites?
I think my absolute favorite, the one that makes me chuckle every day, and I'm going to have to grab my sheet of paper to make sure I read it correctly, is that one actually about, it's called the Room's Minibar. So that's the term, and the definition is as follows. The high water mark of capitalism, invented by the hotel industry to punch holes in corporate expense accounts by charging tired business travelers inflated amounts of money for morsels of alcohol and chocolate so tiny they have to be gift wrapped by elves.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I just love it. It makes me smile almost every day when I think of it.
So, office lingo often describes or expresses workplace oppression. And I never really thought about it, Dan, until you pitched the book to me. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. The office leaders, the leaders of headcount, if you will,
Sure.
1/4 of whom are office bullies, perpetuate these examples of lingo. And if the intent of it is to control workers, then why do we mere mortals perpetuate it? Why do we allow it to continue? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's kind of like a shadow dance. I guess we need the money. We're probably hoping because we all hold on to hope. We're hoping that this is actually going to get better, or maybe we're not the victim of the bully in the office. Maybe we can deflect it. It goes to someone else instead. And we just we engage in a lot of denial in life. That ends, Smells Like Teen Spirit by Kurt Cobain, where he sings, it's the denial, it's the denial, it's the denial.
Right.
It's an powerful aspect of human nature. We're just hoping that this isn't really as bad and ugly as it actually is. And, we spend so much time at work. It's such a strong part of our identity, our professional reputation, our skill sets, how we're treated by colleagues. The stakes are really big here. And I think that what the country has been going through in the last year with the pandemic and the disruption of our lives is a chance to say, boy, do I really want to go back to that kind of workplace? Do I really want that kind of experience? What do I want instead? How could it feel if it's better? And I think that's why people are looking at their job roles, looking at the company they're in, even the career field they're in, and they're really thinking about making a change. And my fear for them is they're going to end up in the same place they just came from. And so the book, in a way, is trying to poke the bear and say, those of you who are in charge of our destinies, the managers and the executives above them, Can you go back and take this pause to refresh and revigorate and get us to someplace better?
Now, you started it funny, and you got great examples from lots of people that you know. I would imagine at some point in the process, your mind started uh, organizing these examples into buckets, and you came up with 7 of them. And I was wondering if you could describe for us what those areas are.
Sure. Well, the book itself, first of all, I had 1,800 definitions, which I winnowed down to about the best 600. I have about another 200 that I'm offering as bonus content for buyers who can go online and pick it up. And then the others I just kind of let go. So there's kind of 2 frames here. The book itself has 5 chapters to it. And one is your own foibles, because it's true we can lift ourselves by our own petard. The second one is managers' blind spots. The third one is colleagues stirring the pot. The fourth one is executive blunders. And the last one is other buffoons. But you're right. Underlying all of that are 7 issues. And here's what I think they really, excuse me, are. One is diversity and inclusion. I'm really stunned by how little progress has been made. As I continue reading on this topic, we're up to like what a whopping 3% of Black men are in the executive ranks.
Mm.
I mean, that's as far as we've gotten so far. It is equally poor for Black women. I think they're up to 4%, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So really, minute categories. And, for women of color, if you're Asian American, you might add 1 percentage point to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it. So I think that's really a big issue, and maybe we could come back to that. And I admit one of the first definitions I put down for the book is in diversity in senior management, a short white guy,
Yeah.
because that is all too close to reality. But there are 6 others, and I want to honor your question. So one I also think is, how are you treated? Do you get real training, real orientation on the job? Or are you handled a manual with nothing much in it to help you? Engagement and retention, empowerment of employees and productivity, accountability and compensations, particularly when the executives are taking home so much money. Collaboration, teamwork, corporate culture. How does that really look like?
Mm-hmm.
And finally, innovation. The pace of change is so quick that simply doing mergers and acquisition activities is hardly sufficient to guarantee a company is going to survive.
Right.
And so I think all of those are really seminal issues that underlie the entries in the book.
I've worked with a lot of people that came out of the military, and guys and gals, I love you all, but you tend to support this kind of lingo. And I'm not sure if it's because you had to memorize so many acronyms, or I think the military kind of lends itself to this kind of bravado. But what did you learn in writing the book that may give us some opportunities for breaking the cycle of blah, blah, blah?
The thing that really struck me at one point, I just went through and said, metaphorically, what's the language here? And it turns out that in so many instances, like drinking the Kool-Aid would be a notorious example.
Oh God, yeah.
They all have the specter of death hanging over them, that we really feel like we're entering, God forbid, the slaughterhouse. And it starts, of course, with all the ways in which we, might get let go.
Yeah.
Kicked to the sidelines, all those kinds of things. But it goes on to just how we feel in the job, and we feel the stress of the job constantly. So that was really what struck me, that there's this shadow of death, looming over it. So no wonder we can't relax and be as productive as we'd like to be. We're all trying to avoid the sword. So I think that's the very first thing that struck me. The second thing is how much the metaphorical language is structured around whether you're in or out, because being on the outside is very dangerous. You go along to get along. And I think that's what a lot of this language is about. It's prefabricated thinking. It's a cliche or lingo we throw out there, and everyone kind of gets it, but really there's nothing to it. There's nothing to get. It's just something we can hold on to, holds us in place. And another thing is just high and low, that we are very conscious of the rank, that's going on. The golden parachute would be a perfect example of this.
Mm.
The executives get a golden parachute because they're floating down from on high. The rest of us, they left out the ripcord, so we just plummet to earth. If we get let go.
One of the things that I think we struggle with now as we pivot into future of work is changing the pronouns from me and I to we and us, right? How does something like that play into this? And does it feed into the lingo, or does it give us an opportunity to be a little more long form in our prose and poetry?
Well, it'd be nice to think so, but I'll give you one example from the book again. Deliverable, something that goes from my to-do list onto yours. So far too often, what happens is, there's the me and then the you, and there's not really a we. Particularly, I was struck by one thing I went through, and I invited people to choose basically any term they wanted to define potentially. Women, you won't be surprised, gravitated really heavily to going after the level playing field because we're quite certain it did not exist. The guys, on the other hand, tended to volunteer to tackle terms where they thought they were lacking autonomy. Like autonomy, what meant being, micromanaged only part-time. That's as far as it went. So there was differences in how people approach things. And I think that ideally the world will change going forward, but how much it will change, I don't think they're going to put the genie in the box. Let me put it back in the bottle, put it that way. I don't think all the companies are going to get the hybrid workers, back into the office as much as they want. The millennials really want it differently. But whether you're going to change the culture as much as I would like to see it changed, I'll hold my breath.
So you and I entered the work world kind of around the same time. And a lot of the hiring managers I had, I think, found their relevance in life in the school locker room, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of the lingo that we have tends to be the us versus them that happens in competitive sports. Be with the team, take one for the team. Take one for the team is a really bad one. That doesn't portend a good outcome.
Yeah, no, I agree. Take the bullet, take the concussion if it's football. And it's brutal, and it's suggesting conflict. And when you look at where the workplace is likely to be headed and needs to be headed, millennials in 3 years are going to be 75% of the workforce.
Right.
What they want is they know there's no job security. They know that's a lie. So they're saying, okay, I'll actually take less money because I'm looking to develop my skills. I'm looking to be at a place that has a mission or a purpose to it. I think actually the young generation has some orientation around emotional intelligence. And that is another kind of sub-theme of the book. And so, I do take some heart from that. And again, we'll see what happens.
So we've spent, it's going to be almost 2 years in lockdown come next January, February. And I would imagine the lingo has shifted a lot to that remote experience that we've all had. You and I have never met in the flesh, right, in person, but we've been on Zoom countless times. So I know who you are, and you would recognize me if I showed up at the airport in Minneapolis. But right now, our experience tends to be remote or hybridized. And if it's hybridized, right now where a lot of us are wearing masks because there's this Delta variant going around. How do you hope once we get through our current Zoom gloom and Zoom diaspora is another one I heard.
That's great.
How do you think we are going to emerge from this? And I mean, if we're keeping lingo, how does it become more perhaps self-deprecating and less pain-inflicting to other people?
Whoa, that's a big question.
Hey, I ask big questions.
No, it is a big question. I think the corporate culture is set by the leadership. And I actually want to read one definition here because I think it's apropos to where I'm trying to go to. Let me see if I can find it here. Yes, gut check. The oblique way male leaders refer to emotions, conveniently bypassing the heart, which is regarded as a female organ.
Oh boy, really?
I think so. I mean, maybe that's, you talked about the military, and
Yeah.
maybe because I've done some work in pro sports and, been in the locker rooms literally, as well as with the general managers and the coaches, and they would never refer to emotions. I mean, it was always gut check. That
Mm,
was the language being used. And to admit to feeling down, stressed, worried. I mean, guys certainly feel fear, but they don't admit to it readily. So I would like to think that emotions have to be allowed more into the conversation. I think women are more accepting of that, and I think that the companies that do well and thrive get there in part because they reflect their, obviously, not only the talent pool that they can draw on, that they're broader for it, but they're reflecting who they're selling to, and therefore it's more diverse than the white male executives.
mm,
But there's a lot of, I'm not so convinced they're going to go there based on seeing the rightness of diversity and inclusion.
of course
I
not.
do think they could go there though when they see that the companies that manage to innovate and get higher returns do, at least to some degree, open up the executive ranks more and open up the company's ranks more. And that's probably the only way you're going to get there. And so I think that if we've had all these meetings and we've been remote, a lot of the recommendations I've been reading are saying things like, okay, keep the meeting short, make it much more organized and
Mhm.
efficient than it's ever been in the past, but also open up the mics 10 minutes early so that people, if they arrive early, can actually chat among each other, get to know each other better, say how they're feeling about maybe the project or initiative that they're collaborating on, and a little more informality. And in that way, actually create some more bonding, create a more conducive environment, and I think that's worth pursuing as opposed to these large meetings. If you're on a football team, there's a lot of guys and there's not going to be a lot of intimate conversations.
No.
What I've witnessed is women are far better at the one-to-one conversation. And I say this in part because as a business traveler, I've eaten a lot of dinners alone and a lot of lunches alone on the road over the years. And part of what I've done to amuse myself and learn is observe the conversational patterns of who's out for dinner. Is it a couple? Is it a group of men, a group of women? How do they conduct themselves? What topics do they dare broach? And it's very much different. So I'm not anti-guy, but I am pro-female in terms of trying to broaden the discourse and the ways in which we hold the conversations and do better. I don't know how you're going to get to better morale when you never ask someone how they're feeling, and how things are going for them, on a project.
And that's where we're at right now. I mean, today's hiring manager has to, whether they like it or not, be a little bit of a social worker and
Yeah.
be intentional about saying, so Dan, I haven't talked to you in a while. Everything okay? Tell me about what's going on at home. How's your kid doing? I understand, she's taking AP classes right now. That must be tough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I think good hiring managers do that instinctively because if they can make a human connection with the people they work with, they're going to get more buy-in. I would think that the return on investment is going to be better because they're showing their humanity. Would you agree with that?
I would, because it really, when you go back to it, it's pretty simple. I mean, a company to function needs talent, and ideally the best talent it can get, as opposed to just people filling the seats. And then obviously they need the revenue, and then they need the ideas so that there's something to sell to people that stays pace with the competition and is ideally out ahead of it. So for two of those three,
Mm,
you really need to build up a good workforce, and you need to keep the workforce. I mean, the turnover rates in the last decade have gone up quite a bit. And so that's becoming a more difficult task because the millennial, unlike, perhaps older workers, really has shed the idea that I'm going to have job security here and a
right.
pension and so forth. So that's not going to keep them in place. And if they're willing to move on and find some pasture that works better for them, then you're going to have to create some engagement. You're going to have to create something where they feel empowered. So some of the favorite stuff I'm seeing is an opportunity to make the manager's role shrink back. It's less of managing people and more of being the intervening specialist who says, "Oh, yeah, I've faced that problem before. Maybe here's an idea or here's a resource, and I can connect you to so and so in the company who might be a good mentor." And you let the workers often generate their own teams or
Mhm.
elect their own leaders and come up with their own ideas. I was just reading about a company in Japan that works in the B2B realm, and they have a employee fair twice a year, which isn't like the employees looking for new jobs, it's the employees creating new ideas for the company. And they get showcased on the stage. People get to vote on which ones they like better. They track the kind of internal ROI. They're creating, entrepreneurs within the company, and it's gone really well for them.
I,
And very
I'm
few companies have done that.
I'm listening to you and I'm thinking back 30 some odd years when I was in the agency space. And that was my tendency. I wanted to reach out to others because I'm a curious person. I'm extroverted. I want to meet people. And you never know, you might find somebody within the company who might benefit us in some way or benefit me. That was discouraged. We were supposed to stay within our silos. Oh, there's
Yeah.
another one. Stay within our
Yeah,
silo. Right.
absolutely. Stay in your swim lane, stay in your silo, all of that. No, when I was at a major company, I transformed everything I could get my hands on, and I believe made it better. And the CEO that I was doing the work for certainly thought that.
Yeah.
But then it just turned out that I was going to have to do the same task over again, but now hobbled by a new general manager who come in who wasn't innovative and wasn't going to give me a long leash. And I left. And what would have really worked for me was something I've also just read recently, which is creating internal fellowships that you have people who could apply. And for a 1, maybe 2 year stint, basically their purview is to look at the company's processes and outputs and investigate and come up with suggestions on what could be possibly changed or improved on. And that would have been the sort of role that would have kept me at that particular company. And I think
Would have kept me there too.
yeah, well, when you made the comment, that's why I thought of it, because I said, well, who's another curious person? This person I'm talking to
Right.
here today. And we exist, but we are not encouraged. We both left the fold for probably exactly that reason.
Yeah.
We weren't given a chance to blossom or innovate and make differences. We were just told to keep our head down and keep getting the work done. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but what
And
you've just described is a very future of work goal
yeah, it is.
that we have within us all the power to change, motivate, improve, create great outcomes, et cetera. We can all be our own agents to that end. But the old style of management doesn't allow that. It trickles down what it wants you to do. And because of that, Dan, and you know this well because we've talked about it, a really good person who gets hired within a company like that gets recruited. They may not last 2 years or beyond 2 years because they're going to run through their bag of tricks and say, you know what? I've done everything here I can possibly do. To me, I've done here everything I can possibly do is the worst thing you want to hear.
Yeah.
It should be, I have yet to get started. I've had a great 2 years. I can't wait for the next 2.
Well, and office politics is a big part of it. I mean, another thing that I was reading recently has an excellent suggestion, which is, there's tremendous inefficiency in these meetings,
Mm-hmm.
and there's tremendous inefficiency in all the time lost on the emails, and to an extent that we would never tolerate on the factory floor or for a service worker who has a rote series of tasks to go through. But we slip left and right and overthink and rethink and fail to decide in endless meetings. And I don't know about you, but my experience in meetings is, it's kind of like what Warren Beatty said about any script. He said, cut it in half.
Mm-hmm.
I could take any meeting and I would cut it in half twice over. I would cut in half the number of people attending the meeting, and I would cut in half the length of the meeting. And, and then I would say to myself, did we actually get to a tangible outcome as a result of this meeting? But there's too many people there. And, in the book, I think I said meetings are, boredom interspersed with tedium. And that's about how it feels most of the time. You don't really have a active, cogent role to play. And you're just kind of listening to people yip, yip, yip. But there is one really true reason why you end up going to the meeting, which is I think you're also guarding yourself against office gossip and
Mhm.
getting stabbed in the back. Early in my career, I had a PR guy. He said, "Yeah, I left my agency in New York, set up my own PR shop." He said the reason was I dealt with the office politics from 9 to 4 or 4:30,
Mhm.
and then I worked on the client's needs from about 4:30 to 7 or 8, and that's kind of was how it worked because the long knives were always out and people were always taking you apart. And I think that's a big reason why people do go to the meeting, just to make sure they didn't miss something or some snide comment. They're not going to get blindsided by something down the road. It's not because they're going to add something to the meeting. It's defensive in nature.
Now, my wife's in education, and what you just said, I can validate. How much of her meetings are things that aren't really necessary and don't get to the mission that she needs to address.
Yeah, and it depends on the worker, but estimates I see is 35 to 80% of their work time is taken up with meetings and emails around a quarter or 20 to 25% of their time. And does most of that need to be said or covered, especially when it's, let's revisit this later? That does not move things forward and it just gets frustrating. I mean, I think we all like to have a sense of progress in life and we like to have a sense that we're able to make a difference. We're like to think that things can improve, that I can control my destiny. That's why, that's all in the language of anger, because you don't feel like you're in control.
And I think it's why, and as you mentioned, the Great Resignation, why so many people are in fact hitting the pavement, another lingo,
Yep.
which is because they feel like their life at work, their life, which includes those work hours, isn't their own. And they feel as if they're not in control of it, they're not happy about it. And I think many people may find their bliss in independent work, either as strategists or as project managers or whatever, because they can at least control their end of the equation better if they're not a paid employee who's owned by the hiring manager, so to speak, to do a certain task a certain way.
Well, that's why I love these internal teams, if they can be organically derived. I mean, every job I was in, I just had a natural affinity for some of my colleagues that I felt comfortable with, that I appreciated, felt
Mhm.
appreciated by in turn, thought they were intellectually alive, that our values aligned, whatever the criteria kind of, was, implicit as it may be. A chance to work with those people on a project as opposed to having someone assigned to my team, or even worse, the leader of the team that I really thought was an empty bag and just
Mhm.
kind of sitting there and sitting on our necks. Boy, would that make a difference in what I would get done and how long I'd stay in that company's ranks. And, you and I cannot be alone. I think this is probably close to a universal feeling. I mean, sure, in every company, every role, there are some people who just kind of taking the paycheck and trying to just hang on, but I think they get driven to that point often. And I'd like to think that most people come in actually hoping they can do something interesting in their day because the time goes faster for one thing than just waiting it out. That's painful.
Apropos to nothing, I just dropped my daughter off at school in Richmond, Virginia. And as I'm about to drop her off, I look at her and she's having a panic attack. And I'm like, what's going on? And she says, I don't know. And she simmered down. She went into her apartment and everything seemed fine. And I'm driving home and I realized she's been away from people and a routine for months. And I think about people who work. I think about school children who forgot their social engagement skill. I'm hoping that this disruption, Dan, that we're having breaks that cycle that you talk about, where we're perpetuating this language of oppression and gets us to a point where we just say, you know what, let's use this opportunity to re-engineer how we work, how we engage with one another, and how we measure the success of our outcomes.
Yeah, no, I think every single person should say to themselves, how am I connective? How do I collaborate? And if they do that instead of being the oppressor or
Mm.
the opinionator without any backup to it to actually get something done, That would be even by itself, without any statistics on how we're going to change the diversity hiring
Mm.
or productivity numbers or paying the workers more. Just if the esprit de corps within the office, within the corporate headquarters could be different based on connectivity and collaboration, I think that would make a tremendous difference.
And from top down, our
Oh, absolutely.
ranks have to look more like America.
No, they do. I mean, I know a lot of this is going to seem like pie in the sky, but I worked for this CEO, and I had a little bit of interactions with the board, which was CEOs from other companies and
Mm.
distinguished thought leaders who were taking the nice money to be on the board. And at one point I had proposed, okay, yes, I'm in charge of the annual employee report or the annual stockholder report, and I proposed an annual employee report, which got torpedoed by my vice president. But just the other day, I kind of went back to it. I said, the fact of the matter is the board never interacted with the regular employees. They had no idea what was going on in the company. They're supposed to be, and they got a fiduciary responsibility. They're supposed to be the stewards of the company. And all they're getting is the filtered information that the executive team is prepared to give them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got the executive team, which is quite likely to be isolated, and then an executive board, which is only there occasionally convening, which is even more isolated. So you've got the blind truly leading the blind. And wouldn't it be great that one of the things that happened for the executive committee, the board of directors, would be that they actually had some functions and ways in which they could meet. And I'm not saying union leaders necessarily, but they could get some voice of both the customer directly and the employee directly, because those are the two big, pools of people involved in this equation. And I just think they're out of sight, out of mind, and that has ramifications. So that's a
Mhm.
different way of looking at connectivity. But you're right. What I'm trying to do is mix up the whole salad bowl, from top to bottom, and just try to look at this thing differently. And I just think the impetus is turf battle. And that's the safe place to go. We're saying this is good enough, or I've learned how to survive in this system, or I'm benefiting from this system. But I don't think the company's benefiting, and that's why I hold out these hopes.
And as a former recruiter, I can admit that a lot of companies hire people to solve their own problems of incompetence or inefficiency or whatever, when in fact they should just be hiring really good people who are interesting to be around, who have lives and points of view, and together can create some cultural alchemy that not only will make it a great company, but a company that succeeds because it's a great company.
Well, I mean, you could go back to the sports analogy. Some teams draft for a role,
Right.
particular, position, but a lot of teams, including Belichick, often will look for the discards, the malcontents, someone who's underutilized, underappreciated, and or will simply say, I'm going to go for the best talent,
Right.
and then I'll figure out what role they're in, because the whole thing could change anyway. I might have a new scheme, a new plan, a new reorg. God knows companies go through reorgs constantly. So why not look for the people who can, really have something, on the ball, and make the difference, rather than, the regressive. I got this little need right now, so
Mm-hmm.
I'll hire in this really niche, narrow way. So I very much agree with you, and I'm sure you've got additional vantage points there as to what goes on that are certainly beyond my purview.
Oh, indeed. Dr. Dan Hill, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. One more question I was going to ask, which is, as you and Howard reflect back on this book, what are your what are the hopes that you have for future of work and workplace discourse?
Whoa. Well, I guess one point I fantasized that it could be a little buzzer in the office, and anyone could press it if they heard a cliche like synergy that they'd simply had enough of.
Mm.
I did find online that that was the most hated term that is out there,
Synergy.
synergy, because there's
Yeah.
usually no synergy, and particularly if it's brought up to the M&A level, which mostly fail. Not only does it fail, but there are victims, because people get cast out to create the actual savings that the synergy was supposed to create, which it failed to operationally.
Well, I'll tell you the first time I heard the term synergy, and guess where I was working in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And it was the term synergy had come from a company, which I won't name, but that started the first frequent flyer miles program. And the
Sure.
synergy was the reward to the airline brand. And yeah, that's a good one. Very good. So, Dan, you got this book and it's called Blah, Blah, Blah. Where can we find it? Where can people buy it?
It is on Amazon because they own the roost, and that's simply the easiest way to go. I love bookstores. I do buy things in bookstores. I have an independent bookstore formerly owned by Garrison Keeler in the neighborhood, and I buy there frequently. But the truth is, as an author, your book is often on the shelf very briefly.
Right.
3 weeks, 6 weeks. If you don't pay the money to have it on a table up front, it could go unnoticed and then it's gone. So what you get with Amazon is longer shelf life, and they certainly know how to play the game. And I'm not suggesting they play it gently all the time by any stretch of the imagination. But if you go into their select program, you can stay there longer. So, I guess what I should have put in the book is an extra category, which is all the terms we've been forced to suffer through, including I should have really had an entry for I agree, because we're always asked to agree by all the tech companies to this really long language that we never read and have no choice about effectively regarding the software we're using and the, so forth and so on services.
The EULA. EULA. Well, very good. Dan, I hope we can get you back on sometime soon. You're like our returning champion. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Always nice to see your face and hear you laugh.